Hello and welcome to Value Research Helpline. I'm Ruchira and our experts here at Value Research are now all set to answer your queries on investing and personal finance. Joining us is Ashutosh Gupta, who heads the mutual fund research team at Value Research and works closely on developing new services and initiatives at Value Research. Welcome, Ashutosh.
Thank you, Ruchira.
Today's first question has been sent in by Aditi, who asks, as fresh SIP of more than 2,500 rupees is not allowed in Mirai Asset Emerging Blue Chip Fund, can I invest in Mirai Asset Tax Saver Fund instead, considering they have almost the same portfolio?
Yes, Mirai Asset Emerging Blue Chip has recently put gates on fresh inflows, and that has been a cause of big disappointment for certain investors who wanted to invest more in that fund. So we are in a situation where investors are queuing up to invest in a fund, but the fund is hesitant in accepting more inflows. And that is in the right spirit. The fund is concerned that massive inflows from here on may limit the ability of the fund manager to deploy all that money speedily, which could drag the performance and therefore hurt the interests of existing investors. And therefore, to protect their interests, it wants to have more control over inflows in the fund from here on. So that's all in the right spirit done by the fund house. Now, in terms of looking at Mirai Asset Tax Saver as an alternate, well, she's right that both the portfolios have a high degree of overlap. Going by the last disclosed portfolio of these funds, there is about 80% overlap in their portfolios. But having said that, with the remaining money, Mirai Asset Emerging Blue Chip is slightly more aggressive with its allocations to mid caps and small caps. Now, Mirai Asset Tax Saver is one of the best tax saving funds available at the moment. It has a fantastic performance record and a very consistent one in its history so far. And it also comes at a very fabulous expense ratio of just 0.3%, which is the lowest among the direct plans of tax saver funds. So it has a lot going for it. And certainly she can invest in that fund at least to the extent she derives tax benefits. Even beyond that, there is really no embargo on investing in that fund. But I'd suggest she should look at it more in the context of her overall portfolio. What other allocations she has to other funds. That's because this fund would come with a 3-year lock-in. And she has to bear in mind that, during this while, if something goes wrong in the performance of the fund, if the fund manager changes, at times the personal life circumstances of an investor change so as to compel him or her to exit or redeem some investments. All those possibilities will not be available in this fund because it comes with a 3-year lock-in. So while she can invest more than the tax benefit that she's going to derive, but I'd suggest she should not go too overboard and look at it in the context of her overall investments.
The next question comes in from Aditya B, and he asks, is Tata Retirement Savings Fund Progressive Plan a good option fund for long-term investing for retirement? Also, how about Quant Liquid for parking emergency corpus of more than 1 lakh rupees?
Well, the progressive plan of Tata Retirement Savings Fund, first thing that I like to point out to him is that he should not go by the word retirement in a fund's name to assess the suitability of a particular fund for a particular goal. Now, talking about Tata Retirement Savings Fund, the progressive plan, it is a diversified equity fund managed in a multi-cap style. So since its retirement goal is fairly long-term and is a fair while away, so I would say that any multi-cap fund potentially could be a retirement savings vehicle for him. He should not get fixated to a particular name, even though this fund boasts of a reasonably good track record of performance. But there are some limits that it puts on redemptions. If one redeems before completing 5 years from the date of investment, the fund would charge an exit load of 1%. So that's a limitation that he would have to bear in mind. And as I said, more broadly, he should not get fixated with the word retirement in the name of a particular fund, but rather look at it more broadly as a multi-cap category which would suit his investing needs, and then evaluate funds and make selection of a couple of them. Now, coming to the second part of his question about the Quant Liquid Fund, but I'll say I'll be wary of recommending this fund, even though it is the best performing liquid fund at this point in time. And I'll explain my rationale for it. One is that despite the fact that this fund has given stellar returns, there are a few things which do not go in its favor. As per my understanding, or the way I look at liquid funds. One is that it has very high expense ratio. Its current expense ratio ranks it at least 3 times higher than what one would expect to pay for a reasonably priced liquid fund. So that's point number one. But one can argue that despite high expense ratios, if it is giving very high returns, then what's the problem? Well, the idea is that those high returns have come at the expense of slightly higher risk that this fund takes. Historically, this fund has had a track record of investing significantly in less than top rated papers. Now, even going by the current portfolio of this fund, while it is invested largely in issuers of high quality as far as their short duration papers are concerned, but if we look at the long term, the ratings of the long term bonds of some of these issuers, then they are not so high rated. For instance, the top issuer that is there currently in this fund's portfolio, even though its short term papers are rated highly, but if you look at the long term rating of this issuer, it stands at AA minus. Now, these kind of issuers, typically even their short-term papers would be yielding slightly higher returns than other high quality papers, and that would help the fund bump up the returns by investing in these kind of bonds. But one would have to acknowledge that it also comes with a slightly higher risk. In fact, this particular aspect will also start factoring into the revised riskometer rating that the SEBI has introduced. So once this is put into effect, for liquid funds, SEBI has mandated that an issuer's long-term rating would have to be factored in while doing the risk grading of a liquid fund. So this aspect would start getting captured in the revised riskometer guidelines very soon. The other point about quant liquid is that it also has a history of running a fairly concentrated portfolio in a few issuers. Now that could be a function of the small size of the fund, but if you look at the last 10-12 months, single issuer concentrations have even touched 20-25% of the assets. So more broadly, the point I'm trying to make is that it has delivered handsome returns, but those have come at the cost of higher risk. Now, when we recommend liquid funds in our framework of things, we prefer to go by funds which are very reasonable on expenses and always maintain a very well diversified and a high quality portfolio. In that framework, this fund does not really fit in. So now he can really decide, given this background and the risk reward outcomes that I've just explained.
Now, Amar Shahani wants to know which type of risk is attached with investing in banking and PSU debt funds. Are they safe from interest rate fluctuations?
Well, banking and PSU funds generally rank lower on the risk in comparison to many other debt categories. As the name suggests, they invest in bonds of banks and public sector companies, and the underlying portfolio quality is usually high in terms of credit ratings and the overall credit quality. Now, these funds also usually maintain a short to medium duration range for their portfolios of say 3, 4, or 5 years. So while they are not completely insulated from interest rate fluctuations, but the impact of changes in interest rates is much lower than say categories like a dynamic bond fund or other medium to longer duration categories. So I'd say that the impact of interest rate fluctuations is relatively lower. The other thing is a lot of these funds are also managed on a roll down strategy. Now, roll down strategy is one where a fund manager builds a portfolio with a certain defined average maturity and then holds on to it and lets the average maturity come down gradually as time passes by. For instance, a fund manager can build a portfolio with an average maturity of about 4 years and then let that maturity roll down with time. So after 1 year, the average maturity of the portfolio would come down to 3 years and then 2 years and so on. Now, in this kind of a strategy, if an investor opts to remain invested in the fund, during this entire roll down duration, let's say in our example, if the fund, if the investor continues to remain invested for the entire duration of 4 years, then the impact of interest rate fluctuations on his overall returns would be even minimal. So from that perspective, I'd say that the impact of interest rate fluctuations is fairly minimal. But he has to take note of the fact that given that these funds rank relatively low on risk, one also needs to have his return expectations in a fairly moderate range.
Dilip Sahi says PPFAS FlexiCap Fund has enabled creation of segregated portfolio in the scheme. Please explain what is it?
Okay. Well, first of all, PPFAS Long-Term Equity Fund has recently announced its plans to rename itself to PPFAS, the Parag Parikh FlexiCap Fund, and switch over from the multi-cap category to the FlexiCap category. And this would be put into effect from 13th of January. Now, from an investor's perspective, the change in the category or the change in the name should not be cause of much botheration, because by and large, it is expected that other than this cosmetic change, the underlying portfolio should remain the same and the risk reward attributes of the fund should remain the same. Just to provide a bit of a background, SEBI had recently changed the investment mandate of multi-cap funds, and had Parag Parikh chosen to keep this fund in the multi-cap category only, it would have needed to significantly alter its portfolio. But by moving to the flexi-cap category, it would be able to provide continuity, and there would by and large be status quo in terms of the way the fund is managed. So investors need not worry too much about that. Now, coming to the segregation bit, I'll just provide a background first. This is a provision which is more applicable to debt funds. And about 2 years back, SEBI had allowed debt funds to segregate and separate out certain bonds in their portfolios, which default on their repayments to the fund. And this was largely done as a measure to safeguard the interests of the existing unit holders. And once, as and when those segregated bonds make repayments, only those unit holders would be entitled to the recovered amount, which were unit holders on the date when the segregation happened. Now, let me explain this with an example. Let's say you are an investor in a bond fund, and let's say on a particular date, say 1st of June, one particular bond holding, which accounted for 5% of assets, default on their repayments. And the fund decides to segregate and separate out these bonds from the main portfolio of the fund. So on 1st of June, the portfolio this particular bond would get separated out from the portfolio, and the NAV of the fund of the main portfolio would drop by 5%. Now, as an investor, let's say you are disappointed with this loss, with this segregation, and 1 month down the line on 1st of July, you decide to exit from the fund. So you redeem your investments and take back the money, whatever you get at the applicable NAV on that date. Now, fast forward 3-4 months, say on 30th of September, the fund eventually is able to recover the money, the dues that it had from this segregated bond. So the recovered amount, this particular unit holder would also be entitled to his proportionate share. So the fund house would look at all the unit holders who were invested in the fund on 1st of June when the segregation happened, and pay the recovered amount in a proportionate share to each of them. So even though this unit holder at the time of recovery was not an investor in the fund, but he would still be entitled to the recovered amount from the segregated portfolio. And likewise, any new investors who invest in the fund after 1st of June would not be entitled to share this recovered amount. So broadly, this is a very investor friendly move and promotes fair treatment of unit holders. Now, with that background, the next question comes. So what does this provision have to do with an equity fund like a PPFAS FlexiCap fund? Well, the idea is that even though one normally does not expect equity funds to have any sizable holdings in bonds, but from an investment mandate perspective, they do have the flexibility to invest a certain proportion of their assets in fixed income instruments. So now that PPFA has incorporated this enabling provision to create a side pocket, going forward at any point in time, if it does invest a certain portion of its assets in fixed income instruments, And in an eventuality, if those bonds do need to be segregated, at least the fund has an investor friendly provision which is activated in its scheme information document for it to segregate those bonds. But as I said, in the normal course, I do not expect this provision to be made use of by a fund like PPFAS FlexiCap, but the enabling provisions are there, which is a good thing. So broadly, the investors need not worry about it, and they can expect status quo on this fund.
Lalit Khurana wants to invest 1.3 lakh rupees for this financial year in ELSS for his father, who is a retiree. Looking at the high market level, is it a good option to spread his money in next 4 months? Is what he wants to know.
Well, I'd say that whether he should be investing in the ELSS or not for him, he should first look at his overall. He should look at it in the context of his overall investments. What is his income requirement? What are his sources of income? Now, I presume since he's looking to make tax saving investments, I presume that his father already has other sources of income, and he need not depend on this money for his regular income in requirement, for his regular income requirement in his retirement years. So from that perspective, if his father can set this money aside for long term, and by long term I mean say the next 7 years or more, and he can really withstand the ups and downs in the equity market of the kind that we've seen in the last 8 to 10 months, then by all means he can go ahead and invest in ELSS and spread this money over the next four months which are left in the current financial year. Now, if he looks at this investment in the context of the next 7 years or more, then I think the current market levels should not be of great concern. And over this entire holding period, he should still be able to make better returns than any other fixed income alternative.
Now, Krishna says value research generally suggests investors to avoid investing in too many funds beyond 4 to 5. Does it apply to portfolios having both debt and equity funds? Krishna wants to build a 60s to 40 equity to debt portfolio with the help of equity and debt funds, not with hybrid funds.
Okay, well, I'd say that there is no specific hard and fast rule around the number of funds that you should have in the portfolio, but we generally believe that diversification is important and one should diversify, but one should not go overboard. Our experience or whatever research we've done, the numbers that we see suggest that beyond 4 or 5 funds, you really end up adding complexity to your portfolio, and the benefits of diversification diminish rapidly beyond that. In fact, we did a very comprehensive study recently, the results of which we published in our monthly magazine Mutual Fund Insights some time back, where we looked at the multi-cap category and we ran an analysis on all possible portfolio combinations that were possible within the multi-cap category, ranging from portfolios of 2 funds to 8 funds. Now, this exercise yielded portfolio combinations somewhere close to 48 lakh. So that is suggestive of the breadth of this study. And we considered a time period of the last 10 years. So our study revealed that as we progressively added one more fund to a combination of funds in a portfolio, say we move from 2 funds to 3 funds or 3 funds to a portfolio of 4 funds, initially the benefits were meaningful in terms of reduced volatility in the portfolio as measured by the standard deviation over this holding period. But progressively, as we moved beyond 4 or 5 funds, the incremental reduction in volatility was not meaningful. So the idea is that beyond 4 or 5 funds, the benefits of diversification diminish rapidly. But on the other side, you add on to the complexity of managing a bigger portfolio, and at times large number of funds can also become a drag on the performance. So that's why we believe that 4 to 5 funds is a good enough number for a portfolio. And I'd say that a similar principle holds true for debt as well. There is no point spreading far too thin across too many funds, which does not yield any meaningful benefit. Now, in his case, he talked about his desire to maintain a 60-40 allocation between equity and debt. I think he can very well manage that with a portfolio of 5 funds. So he can look to pick 3 equity funds and 2 high quality debt funds. and spread his money by allocating 20% to each of these funds. So with these 5 funds, he would be easily able to create a 60-40 allocation. And once he does that, he should look to rebalance his investments on an annual basis, and that should be good enough.
Pratap Jaisinghani wants to know the difference between dynamic asset allocation and equity saving funds. He also wants to know the reason for Value Research not recommending dynamic asset allocation funds.
Okay, let me talk about both these two categories of funds one by one. So talking first about the dynamic asset allocation funds, well, on paper, their investment mandate looks very promising. They are by far the most unconstrained type of mutual fund available. Here, the fund manager has the complete flexibility to invest across equity and debt instruments in any proportion, and then dynamically alter the mix of debt and equity depending upon their outlook on markets or several other factors that they may want to take into consideration. Now, why we are wary of this category despite a very unconstrained investment mandate is that to be able to dynamically move between equity and debt often requires the fund management team to take a call on the markets. And we think it's fairly difficult to get your call on the markets right sustainably. On the contrary, we are much more comfortable with hybrid asset allocation funds which have a more defined asset allocation pattern. For instance, aggressive hybrid funds, which come with a very defined asset allocation of about 75% equity, 25% debt, and they rebalance periodically to remain close to this kind of an allocation. Now, the advantage of this is one that the fund manager does not need to take a call on the market. There is a defined asset allocation around which his actual allocations can revolve. And second, from an investor's perspective, it provides a very definitive cue about where the fund lies on the risk return spectrum, and therefore an investor can decide upon whether a particular hybrid is suitable to him or not, depending upon his time horizon, its goals, and whether that kind of asset allocation suits his investing needs. So therefore, we believe that hybrids which come with a more defined asset allocation are preferable. Now, having said that, there are certain dynamic asset allocation funds which manage their equity to debt allocation in a much more pragmatic way. So rather than leaving it to the judgment of a fund manager or an investment management team, these funds have a methodical and a quantitative approach which decides what should be their asset allocation between debt and equity at a particular point in time. And I think that is far superior than leaving it to the judgment of individuals. One such fund is ICICI Prudential Balance Advantage Fund, which is very methodical in the way it goes about its asset allocation, and you can see the changes happening systematically with the level of the market. And results show that it has done fairly well over the years. So I would say that even if one wants to go with a dynamic asset allocation, then one should prefer the one which adopts a more methodical approach to asset allocation rather than deciding it arbitrarily. Now, coming to the other category, the equity savings category, these are funds which typically invest about a third of your money each in equity, debt, and arbitrage opportunities. Now, so you can think of these funds as an improvisation over the monthly income plans or the MIPs as they were known till some time back, and now that category has been renamed as conservative hybrid funds. So they are an improvisation to that because they are able to provide somewhat similar risk reward outcomes, but with a preferential tax treatment similar to that of an equity fund. Now, what happens is that these funds deploy arbitrage opportunities, invest in arbitrage opportunities. So at any given point in time, they are able to keep their equity allocation above 65% of the assets, and that fetches them a preferable tax treatment similar to that of an equity fund. But from a risk reward perspective, they are similar to a fund that invests 65% of its money in debt and 35% in equity. So overall, we believe it's a fairly good tax efficient category for conservative investors or even retirees who are looking for only a measured dose of equity in their portfolio.
All right, the next question comes in from Rajesh Kumar, who took out a huge sum of his money out of market, 50% of his total value when it reached 42K levels, and then he realized his mistake. He now wants to know the strategy to invest it back through mutual funds.
Well, I'd say first of all, he should take this experience as a learning that it is often futile to try and time the market. Rather than that, rather than being guided by the market level, one should be much more guided by one's own investment goals, one's time horizon, and one's risk appetite. So I'd say that he should, derive a lesson from it and not try too hard to time the markets from here on. Rather, stay disciplined and stay focused on his time horizon to make investment decisions. As far as getting back into the market is concerned, again, I think he needs to do nothing different from what he would have done otherwise. He should spread this money and reinvest it in the markets systematically over the next, say, 10 to 12 months. Now, more important for him is to not keep looking back and feel disappointed about, the missed opportunity, and not try too hard to recover the opportunity loss that he's had by staying out of the market, because that can lead him to make bigger mistakes which he may regret later. So from now on, be disciplined about and be methodical about his investment approach, and stop looking back.
Vishnu Anilkumar wants to know if liquid funds generally beat or keep up with inflation. He's wondering where to park his emergency fund and doesn't quite like the idea of it being in a bank.
Well, I'd say liquid funds are not designed to generate inflation beating returns, and they are certainly not beating inflation in the current environment of exceptionally low interest rates. But having said that, over a period of time, one can reasonably expect liquid funds to generate better returns than what a bank account would fetch. So from that perspective, they are a suitable alternative to park your emergency corpus. Now, but it's important that while picking a liquid fund or while setting your expectations from that fund, you should not be too guided by the returns, because returns is always a secondary criteria when you are investing in a liquid fund. You should go with a fund which is low on expenses and high on risk mitigating techniques, such as high degree of diversification, and maintains a high quality portfolio in terms of credit quality at all times. Returns should always be a secondary criteria, and as long as a fund delivers marginally higher returns than a savings bank account, that should be acceptable. Because when you look at the liquid fund category, it is possible to find funds which deliver outlying returns, but then often that also comes with risks of an outlying magnitude. So I would say that don't get carried away by the returns side of the equation, and focus more on the expenses, on the risk side of the equation, and keep returns as a secondary criteria.
Siddharth Modi is asking what should be the allocation to gold ETFs? They are not performing well for the last 3 to 4 months and giving negative returns.
Well, we don't usually have a very favorable view of gold as an asset class for wealth creation. I mean, if we look back over longer time periods of 12 to 15 years, well, gold has had its share of rallies, but over such long investment horizons, equity has turned out to be a much superior option for creating wealth. But having said that, gold has proven its value as a store of wealth, as a store of value. Often, we did a recent study and we found that at any time when equity markets are not doing well, gold performs well. So it acts as a good hedge to your equity portfolio. So if you want to really put your money in gold, then more than wealth creation, look at it as a protector of the downside when the equity markets hit panic mode. And a recent study that we did, we found that over the last 20 years, an investor who would have maintained an all equity portfolio versus an investor who would have maintained a portfolio with 20% allocation to gold and 80% allocation to equity, well, both of these people would have generated somewhat similar returns, but the person having 20% gold in his portfolio have had to witness relatively less volatility through these last 20 years. So as I said, that from that side, look at gold as a hedge to your equity investments. but not really as a wealth creator in your portfolio.
All right, now Dilip Patil has opted for premium service and would obviously like to monitor his portfolio regularly. He wants to know the simplest way to update his portfolio every month as he's doing monthly SWPs and SIPs.
Well, the simplest way to update your portfolio is to use the upload investments feature of my investments tool at Value Research, and use the auto import functionality to fetch and assimilate your common account statement into the my investments tool. So every month, once you are through with your SIP and SWP transactions, once they are done, then you simply go and use this auto import feature. It hardly takes 2 to 3 minutes of your time. And the system is intelligent enough to deduplicate the existing entries and only identify and incorporate the new investments, the new transactions that have happened in a particular month. Not only that, if after the first instance of auto import, a user has reorganized his investments by putting or assigning different labels or creating different portfolios out of his investments, then the system is capable enough to identify and place those new transactions within the user defined labels and user defined portfolios. So I'd highly encourage him to try that out, and I'm very hopeful that he'll find the system to be very intelligent in this respect, and he should find it as a pretty quick solution for his need for updating portfolio without having to do any manual entry.
Now, Hemant has an SIP of 20,000 rupees in a single equity fund. So should he diversify it across two fund houses or continue with the same? What are the pros and cons he wants to know?
Well, it's highly desirable, of course, to diversify and add at least one more fund of a different fund house to his portfolio. Because if he remains invested in a single fund, and if something goes wrong with this fund, then all his investments will be tied to the fortunes of a single fund. So from the principles of diversification, it is highly desirable that he adds at least one more fund to his portfolio. Now, there is really no downside to diversification as long as one does not go overboard on it. Of course, on hindsight, if his original fund where he's making investments turns out to be a far superior performer, then at a later stage he might wonder whether it was the right decision to diversify and add the other fund. But I don't think it's reasonable to think like that, because nobody knows what will happen. So I'd suggest that he should go ahead and add one more fund and diversify.
Ramaya wants to know how can a housewife having a rental income plan for medium-term and long-term goals with mutual funds?
Well, conceptually, I think it should not be any different from the way any investor would do it. So I'll just lay down the broad principles or the broad framework that she can think about. At the top of the hierarchy is her emergency needs. So she should first make provision of at least 6 months worth of her expenses and put that money in a bank account or in a liquid fund. She should not think about any other investments till the time she's provided for this need. Now, once she's past this stage, then for any near-term needs, such as the money that she needs in the next 2 to 3 years, she can make investments for that in debt-related investments, such as some high-quality short-duration funds. Beyond that, let's say for the needs that are due in 3 to 5 years' time, she can add a measured dose of equity to an otherwise debt-heavy portfolio, and this she can achieve through products like equity savings funds or conservative hybrid funds. Beyond 5 years is when she can have a bigger portion of equity in her portfolio and she can go for equity heavy investments. So broadly, this is the kind of framework that she can follow, but I'll say over and above that, she should be guided by her personal circumstances. How sustainable or how stable is the rental income that she talked about? What kind of investable surplus is she able to generate? Does she have any other accumulation already? Now, if answers to some of these questions nudge her towards being a little more risk averse, then she can tone down the equity component in the portfolio. For instance, if she wants to be risk averse, then even for very long-term goals, she can opt for aggressive hybrid funds rather than pure equity funds. These aggressive hybrid funds invest about 25% of the money in debt, and that cushions the volatility of equity. So broadly, I'd suggest she can follow this framework to figure out suitable investments for herself.
Hope you got your answer, Ramaya. Now, today's last query has been sent in by Vijay Kumar Marthi, who says, if he invests in direct plans, will the fund house provide services for things like setting up of SWPs, STPs, redemptions, etc.?
No, direct plans are meant for do-it-yourself investors. Now, I'll provide a bit more perspective on that. See, for a direct investor, a direct plan investor, there are three different ways in which one can make transactions and manage investments on an ongoing basis. To make any SIP, SWP, or any other transactions, one can either use the bricks and mortar infrastructure, the investor service centers of the fund house, or the registrar and transfer agents, Karvy and CAMS. So he can figure out a nearby investor service center and go in person to make applications for SIP or SWP. Otherwise, one can also transact online on the website of the concerned fund house through a digital mode. And finally, these days, there are also several online investment platforms available which facilitate transactions in the direct plans. So the broad point is that the fund house would be able to provide the enablement in terms of the physical infrastructure, the investor service center, or provide all the enablement to make transactions through its website. But the onus would really be on the investor to make these transactions on his own. Now, per se, I use a platform by the name of Mutual Fund Utilities, and I've been using it for the last several years. And I find it a fairly convenient and a hassle-free way of transacting in mutual funds. In fact, I believe that anybody who is comfortable, doing his banking online should find it fairly convenient and hassle-free to make mutual fund transactions online with all the digital modes that are available these days. Of course, there might be some friction at the time of onboarding with all the KYC and some other requirements, but even those these days are possible to do without one having to leave from his or her home. So I'll say that all this is very much possible. Managing one's direct investments is fairly easy to do online these days, but of course, one does not get the kind of hand holding that an intermediary would provide. And I believe that by itself, that may not be an entirely a bad idea, because that also eliminates the possibility of being missold a product.
All right, with that, it's a wrap on this episode of Helpline. Thank you, Ashutosh.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to all our viewers. You can go to VR Helpline on Value Research online and send us the questions that are stopping you from investing today. Our team will answer them in the upcoming Q&A session. And we'll now see you next year. Bye for now.